Like a lot of people, you've put a lot on hold. Eating in restaurants, praying in your house of worship, attending sporting events, all to protect your health. So as we all start to get back, the same people who have been protecting your health all along are the people doing the most to keep your health safe. Always. We're open for emergency care and for appointments safely for you. CHI St. Luke's Health Memorial.
Welcome to the Chamber Connect podcast, connecting business to community. My name is Tara Watson-Watkins, and I'm the president and CEO of the Lufkin Angelina County Chamber of Commerce. I'm here with my co-host, Blake Pollino of BP Media Group.
Hey, so we just got done recording with State Representative Trent Ashby, and we wanted to really find out what local elected government means for us here in East Texas. So we talked about what really happens when you need to contact your representative for something, and learned all kinds of great stuff about the representative process and everything that goes along with that. So let's jump into this next episode of the podcast.
Well, we're excited today to have State Representative Trent Ashby, my good friend in the House. And Trent, we welcome you to the Connect podcast. We're excited for the listeners to get to know more of you and your background and really what your focus is and what your vision is for the future. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Tara. It's great to be with you and Blake. As we were talking before the podcast, I haven't done a lot of these, and so this is exciting.
Yeah.
It's new, and I'm really proud to see the Chamber, spearheading this effort.
Thank you. Well, we're excited to partner with Blake. Why don't you give somebody kind of your background? I know you grew up on a dairy farm, and that may not be something that everybody is aware of. So tell us about your history.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So, I was blessed to grow up here in East Texas, in Russ County, about 60 miles north of Lufkin. And I did grow up on a dairy farm. There's not many, unfortunately, dairy farms left in East Texas, but I had the privilege of growing up on one. And one thing about a dairy farm, it will teach you the lesson of hard work at an early age. And, those cows have to be milked 365 days a year, twice a day. And so people may not know, but speaking of milking cows twice a day, so we would milk at 4 and 4. And
wow.
So there were many days, even some school days, as I got older and I had to pay for my gas, where I would have to be out at the barn by 4 o'clock to help milk, for that day, which usually took 3 to 3.5 hours to milk the cows. So anyway, I was excited to get to leave and go to college and attended Texas A&M, which was a great experience, and of course was in sync with my background, majoring in agriculture economics. And so I had a great time at A&M, and the rest is history. So it's just a real pleasure to live here in Lufkin, Angelina County, and beautiful forest country we call home.
That's right. And you were a Yell leader at A&M.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. For our Aggie fans out there, I can hear the whoops in the background. But A&M is always we've cherished our traditions at A&M, and one of our most revered traditions is we don't have cheerleaders. We have 5 Yell leaders. And those individuals, and anybody can run, but those 5 individuals are elected by the student body at Texas A&M, which today is around 55,000 students.
Wow.
A little bit bigger when I was there, which was closer to 40. But yes, they're elected by the student body, and then once elected, you have 2 juniors, 3 seniors. And your job is to be basically an ambassador for the university and to represent the university of all sporting events and all the Aggie Moms clubs around the state. And it was an incredible experience, something I'll always cherish.
I enjoyed seeing a recent photo of you on Facebook teaching the new kids that were leaving Angelina County, going to A&M, and teaching them some things. And I thought, that's awesome. He's still doing it.
Still got it. Yeah,
That's
no, right. It's one of those great traditions that has to be passed down.
That's right.
And I know we'll probably talk more about this later, but in the COVID days that we're living in today, that was really one of the challenges for all incoming freshmen at any college, but specifically for A&M. Those students here locally in Angelina County, they didn't have the opportunity to go to fish camp, as we call it, or to go to a midnight yell practice, which they try to do before the first game of the year. And so I got the invitation to come over and address a group of
That was
our
awesome.
finest here in Angelina County, headed off to A&M, and it was fun. I didn't know if I could still bend down that far to do some of the movements on our yells, but it really was a great time, and
That's great.
hopefully those kids are excited, and I know they're doing well.
That's right. That's
So
great.
I want to talk about the early decision to go into politics. Did that have anything to do with it? I know it was an elected position to be a Yale leader. Did you kind of know then that I kind of like this this vibe of being in politics? Was that a precursor to what you do now?
Well, yes, but just to even go back a little further, so my friends have heard me say this, but really, you'd have to know my mom. My mom was a big believer in be the change you want to see in the world, and so in high school, really even earlier than that, she encouraged me to run for offices in 4-H, and so I started out, running for chapter offices in 4-H. And then one thing led to another, got into high school and did the same thing in FFA. And it wasn't as much as I loved running for office. It was just something that I felt called to do, and it was natural. And so I had a early taste in high school, and then we got to college. And of course, when you bring 40,000 people from all over the world, but
Right.
for sure the country, on that campus, everybody's got a shot, if they want to
right.
run for any office. And so I'd run for some class offices and had some success. And then it's like the great Murphy George once told me. He said, Trent, when it comes to running for office, you'll know it's time when you get the call. And I never really understood what that meant until you kind of put it in context of running for Yale leader. Well, I really didn't harbor this ambition to run for Yale leader, but I started having people reach out to me and say, Trent, you ought to think about this. You ought to run for Yale leader. You'd be great, whatever. And so, long story short, that's really kind of what put me in that position to want to run for Yale leader, is just kind of listening to people around me. And I've tried to carry that through my term in elective service, whether that was on the school board or, of course, now serving as state representative.
Awesome.
So you served on the school board. How long did you serve there?
So I was on the school board, technically it was about 5.5 years. I didn't get to finish out my last year because I was sworn into the Texas House. But I will tell you, and for all the listeners, I wouldn't take anything for those days that I spent serving in a local capacity, especially on the school board. Of course, the chamber, y'all have a lot to do with improving education in Lufkin and Angelina County with our 5 school districts. As a parent of 2 kids at the time in the public schools, it was just something I felt strongly about in trying to help give back and make sure that we were, leaving it better than we found
Right.
it, so to speak. And so I really enjoyed that opportunity, serving on the school board. Other people will say this. I tend to agree. Of course, I'm biased, but when you think about, the Texas legislature and probably could even said for the United States Congress, what I have found is a lot of times what I consider maybe the best members are a lot of times members that have served their local communities in a local elected capacity first. Because what you learn when you serve as on a city council or a school board or a county commissioner's court or any local office is you learn how to work with people.
Right.
And you get to know people in your community on a very personal level, especially when you're dealing with their kids or their taxes,
Oh, sure.
as school board members do. And you also learn the important lesson that you never get everything you want.
Yeah.
And that compromise is not a dirty word, that it's the reality of governing at any level. And so you never compromise your principles, but sometimes you have to work with other people to get to the end goal that everybody is searching for. And so I learned so much during those 5.5 years on the school board, and it really did position me well to catapult to where I am today.
Nice.
Awesome. We want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the legislature and past and future, what's coming up. But before we do that, what was that, and you talked about your history a little bit of coming from your mom, but what was that decision, that day that you decided, I'm going to do this, like I want to run for the Texas State House of Representatives? What was that like? What was the decision like?
Well, I wish it was a day that I could point to
Yeah.
because it was a very long, arduous process in terms of ultimately making the decision to run for this office. Without getting too weedy on this, there was every 10 years, the legislature redraws the political boundaries for the Texas House, the Texas Senate, State Board of Education, and our United States congressional representatives, and those boundaries. And so in 2011, that process occurred, and Angelina County was put into a new district, and there was an opportunity there, not having an incumbent from Angelina County, which really was about 51% of the new district, our new House District 57, which is about 170,000 people. And going back to what I said earlier about Murphy, listening for the call, I had a number of people reach out to me, as well as there were other people in the community that were, I think, being very interested in running for this position. And, what's interesting, and I don't know if I've ever shared this publicly, but actually we got to a point where there was a couple of other people looking, and I finally said, you know what, I'm on the school board, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, I have young kids, maybe the time is not right. And so I had indicated to one of the other folks that I was going to back out of consideration. Well, as it turns out, that didn't work out for this other individual, and so a week or two later I got the call, Trent, you need to do this, because right now I'm not sure anybody's going to do it if someone from Angelina County is going to stand up. And so I had to make a decision very quickly. Sure. Obviously, there was a lot of time on bent knee, praying over this, a lot of time in talking to Nikki and the boys about it. But ultimately, a lot of my some of my colleagues on the school board, as a reminder, we had just come through the 2011 session, which was the first time that the Texas legislature had ever cut public education funding. And so there was just a lot of folks, parents, grandparents, people that cared about education that were really upset. And they felt like that we needed to send members to Austin that would champion our most important resource, which is our children. And so anyway, I really had some trepidation about doing it originally, but ultimately I pulled the trigger, announced I was running, and couldn't be more pleased with that decision looking back on it now, almost 8 years later.
That's hard to believe it's been 8 years.
I know, right. It's crazy to believe it's been that long. It's just
think about going back to the Red Barn when you had like the Red Barn's not even around anymore. That's hard to believe.
That was that has been a few years ago, Tara. But yeah, we've been in office. This is my 4th term, completing my 8th year, and I've loved every minute of it, and I still consider it such an honor and a blessing to be able to go and do that.
Education has really been one of your main focuses throughout all of your 8 years.
Sure.
And you were the lead negotiator for the House on education for funding work to fund critical programs at our primary and secondary schools. And then you were on the House Public Education Committee, where you helped secure a landmark school finance reform package that added nearly $12 billion to public schools and a much-needed raise for teachers. And why don't you tell us about that experience? Because I don't think we can thank you enough for all the work that went into that. For our
it was
kids.
I will tell you, Terry, it was a true labor of love.
Yeah.
I think as most people know that know me, I am passionate about a number of issues, and education certainly is top of the list. I'm just, I guess going back, people may say, well, Trent, how did you pick education? Well, folks need to recognize that, my grandmother was a teacher, my mother was a teacher. I still have a sister. I had two sisters at the time I ran that were teachers. Now I just have one that's still in the classroom. And so, I don't get to go to a family gathering and not talk education, right? I definitely hear what's wrong with our education system. So it's just kind of in my blood and in my family genes. And so, but yes, I've been blessed really with the couple of speakers now that I've served under to give me an opportunity to have a seat at that table to really, shape some monumental decisions for the 5.4 million children that are enrolled in public schools in Texas and growing. And so House Bill 3, the bill you're referring to from last session, whether I serve no more terms, or if I serve 10 more terms, I'm not sure I will ever touch a bill that will impact or have such a lasting legacy as House Bill 3.
Right.
It truly, in listening to some of the members that have been there quite a bit longer than me, to hear them talk about, the historical perspective of that moment where we came together and unanimously, in a very bipartisan fashion, passed House Bill 3. It was just an incredible scene, and yes, there was a lot of work that went into it, starting with the committee. The process. You start in committee, and ultimately you get it to the floor, and then you got to get it through the Senate, and then it comes back, and you got to work out the differences. And I was on the conference committee to work out the differences with the Senate, and I will tell you, it was remarkable because I learned so much in listening to the views of people from El Paso, people from one of the conferees represents inner city Dallas. One of the conferees is from a wealthier neighborhood in the suburban Fort Worth area. Another one is from Houston. And so it's amazing. We tend to kind of get in our bubble sometimes and think that this is the way it needs to happen.
Yeah.
And then you get in a room and you listen to, in my case, 9 other people with strong opinions about what this bill should ultimately look like. The good news for the state of Texas and for the people of Texas is that ultimately, everybody gave a little, and came together with a bill that ultimately, as I said, passed both the Senate and the House unanimously, and the governor was extremely proud to sign. I remember when he invited us all over to the governor's mansion, and he had all the conferees and the speaker and the lieutenant governor there. It was just it was one of those surreal moments where you kind of have to pinch yourself and say, this is truly historic and monumental. And so definitely something that as I start graying, that I'll always remember.
Yeah.
But no, I was just fortunate to be there at the right time and at the right place.
It's something to be very proud of that you were a part of that.
Well, thank you.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely. So what's coming up? What's on the horizon? What do our listeners need to know about? Obviously, the demographic of this podcast is pretty much your entire district, really. It falls right in that. So what's something that people need to know about that's coming up in legislation and in sessions, and what's kind of going on right now?
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot. And I know we're limited on time here, so I'm going to be fairly brief and succinct in trying to, kind of line out some of the issues that I feel like will be at the forefront of the next session, which it starts in January of 2021, next year.
Right.
So here we are. We're just about 3.5 months out from gaveling in on that. Whatever that session is going to look like, and of course that's I'm sure a whole other question, because everybody's asking me, well, is the Capitol going to be reopened? Is the public going to be admitted? Are we going to be meeting in the Capitol? Are we going to have to go to another off-site location and not have session in the Capitol? These are all questions that are out there, but there aren't any answers yet. But as far as the issues, Blake, that I feel like that are going to be top-of-mind issues for folks here in East Texas, let me start with what we were just talking about. Anytime you pass a bill the size of House Bill 3, both from a policy perspective as well as the funding you talked about, you don't get it right the first time. There's always tweaks and changes that need to be made. And I can, attest and tell the listeners and viewers that there are some changes that need to be made. It was not a perfect bill. Sure. So we will take a whack at making some improvements to House Bill 3 because there are some, frankly, unintended consequences that need to be addressed. Beside that, I will tell you that there's some issues in the higher education arena for our colleges, especially for our community colleges like Angelina, that need to be addressed. And I've always been an advocate for improving our higher education community because in this area especially, where we focus so much on workforce development and economic development and making sure that our young people have an opportunity to stay right here in East Texas and get good jobs. Our community colleges and all of our institutions of higher education, but our community colleges, they play such a vital role, as does Stephen F. Austin just right up the road here. So, I'm going to be listening very closely to what our general academics, our SFAs, and others are asking for, as well as our community colleges. I will tell you the other thing that COVID-19 has really laid bare that we all knew about in East Texas, but I'm not sure the rest of the state did, or at least outside of rural Texas, is the pandemic has really brought to the forefront the lack of connectivity in the internet and broadband space for so many Texans. Just this week, I was on a Zoom call with the Greater Houston Partnership, and one of my colleagues from the inner city Houston area was the other panelist. And she and I could not have agreed more. And that's something I want to make sure folks in rural East Texas understand is, yes, we have plenty of problems right here, and it is a top-of-mind issue for the legislators and our senators in this part of the state. But we are tied in with the inner city areas that also have broadband deserts, just like we are here in East Texas. So the good news is this is not a rural versus urban issue. There are so many people, especially in the more urbanized parts of the state. When I say urbanized, I'm kind of separating out the suburban versus urban.
Right.
Suburban areas, largely, when you look at the maps, they have fairly decent connectivity and coverage. But it's the inner city parts of our big cities, and it's rural Texas that really is starving for that connectivity. And so just last Friday, I was really proud to work with our state Senator Robert Nichols, and we spearheaded a letter to Governor Abbott where we asked him to commit to deploying a statewide broadband plan for Texas. I was shocked to find out that Texas is only one of 6 states in the entire country that doesn't have a statewide broadband plan. And just to further express why that's a real problem is for a lot of the local governments and the COGs and the foundations that submit applications to the federal government, the FCC, for help with dollars to help with bridge this divide. If you live in a state where you don't have a broadband plan, you're automatically deducted points on your application.
Interesting.
Because you don't have one.
Right.
And so, and we've looked at what a lot of the other states are doing. These are not 50-page, 100-page documents. In many cases, these are just a few pages where there's some broad concepts about how the state should go about deploying more broadband and internet. And so this is amazing to me. But this, I think, highlights how important this issue is going to be for the legislature next session. So we sent an email out to I sent an email out to the 150 members of the House, or 149 other members. Senator Nichols put one out to the 31 members of the Senate. And basically, we wanted to turn this letter around quickly. So we said, hey, if you could let us know in 24 hours, if you want to sign this letter, which is a very short period. Normally, staff's got to call the member and they got to talk about it. But we said, hey, we really want to get this letter out, even if it's just he and I. And so we put it out there, and within 24 hours, we had 88 members of the Texas legislature to say, absolutely, sign me up on that letter. And it has, I cannot underscore the amount of attention that it's garnered in the statewide press, but really, more importantly, within the members of the Texas legislature. I've probably had myself another half a dozen House members contact me after the fact and say, man, I wish I would have signed on that letter. I just didn't see it.
That was going to be my question to you.
I didn't see it. I didn't check my email or, And so the good news is I think there's going to be a lot of work and attention on bridging this digital divide between the parts of the state that have broadband connectivity and those that don't. And people's, I figure people just intuitively know why this is important, but when you look at the data, the people that primarily fall into this count are people that live in rural Texas, are economically depressed, people of color, and there's one more subgroup here that I'm forgetting. But this is about, like we were talking about schools opening up. I mean, I'm not going to mention a name or two here, but I've got some schools in my 6 counties where they don't even really have reliable dial-up internet.
Right.
Those kids can't go to school if they're not in person.
Exactly.
That's
and
right.
so this has become a luxury. This has gotten away from being a luxury item to now where this is basically just a fairness issue, because the kids, and we all agree with this, the kids in East Texas and anywhere in the state of Texas, regardless of their zip code, they deserve access to the same educational opportunities. Our small employers, our mom and pops, our corporations that want to be in rural Texas or that are in rural Texas. This has created real opportunities and problems for them as well. It's created opportunities on one hand, the pandemic, to do more online, but if you don't have good broadband or connectivity, then you're limited. Right. And so I think for the first time since in my lifetime, I really feel like this is starting to get the attention of the decision makers both in Washington and in Austin. And I hope to, like on education last session, I hope to really be able to provide a strong voice on this going into next session. So I think this is going to be a big issue. Sure. Now, I just spent about 5 minutes on one topic.
It's a good one.
We
It's a
know
big
Lonnie
one.
Hunt with debt college.
Oh, I know. I can hear him saying amen from across
he will
town.
Be happy about it.
So setting that one aside, just real quickly, I think that at least in my opinion, this is going to be a redistricting session. I sometimes forget that people don't follow it as closely as maybe I do, but every 10 years we get to redraw those lines. And so we're getting down to the last 2 weeks on census. Let me put a plug in for the census.
Yes.
People, I get asked all the time, Trent, really, is it that important? Well, yes. That's why our United States Constitution calls for it. And so many of the decisions that are made, whether it's broadband connectivity, looking at mapping of where households are, or we're talking about federal dollars that flow to our schools, whether we're talking about transportation dollars if you live on a farm-to-market road or a state highway, that, all those decisions, in addition to the political boundaries, are 100% decided every 10 years, and it's only by people that complete the census. And so, people to understand, census responses are locked up. But the president can't get in to see those for 78 years. For 78 years, when you fill out a census, nobody can look at that data once it is entered into and of course they don't ask for Social Security numbers and that
Kind of a random number, 78.
Yeah, don't ask
Not
me
80,
why.
not 75.
Just a good number, I
78.
guess. Just a good round number.
Kind of round number.
I wish I could tell you why it's 78, but maybe the federal folks can answer that question.
There you go.
So census is important because it's going to determine
Sure.
redistricting. And since the state was created, you've seen the urbanization of Texas, and increasingly in the last 30 to 40 years. And so rural Texas really needs to stand up and be counted so that we can protect our rural voices and our rural representation. And that trickles all the way down to your city councils, and because once that information is disseminated, which will be next year, the counties will receive it all across the country, but in this case here in East Texas, and then they will have to redraw commissioner boundaries based to ensure equitable or equity in terms of the numbers in each 4 of the county precincts. Same deal if you live in a municipality. They got to make sure all the wards are representative of approximately within a 5% variance of the same number of people. And so it's just so important to fill out that census form. And then, of course, for me, I'm looking at it as we want to protect rural representation in the state legislature from East, West, South, and North Texas. And so we're kind of all the rural guys are working this together. So that'll be a major issue. Of course, water is always big for East Texas.
Yeah.
And I could go on, but I'll just stop there. Those are some ones that are top.
Yeah, we wanted to just highlight a few of the big points because I think there's a misconception out there about how we're represented and how to actually make change happen.
Can I mention one more?
Yeah, please.
Because I would be remiss if I didn't say this. We have seen in rural Texas over the last 20 years for sure, but really in the last 7 or 8, it's been exacerbated here in East Texas. I can point to 2 counties in particular where we have seen closures of rural hospitals and rural health clinics. And we have got, as a state, to think outside the box and do more to not just protect the medical community and the healthcare professionals that we have, but we need to turn the tide and go the other way. And just this week, earlier, I had visited with one of our medical systems here, as well as one of our educational partners, and it's that type of collaborative effort about thinking about how we can draw, residents to do their residences here in East Texas, whether that's Crockett, Madisonville, Lufkin, San Augustine, wherever. We've got to incentivize and recruit and draw people here to East Texas because we don't, we shouldn't have to drive to the big cities for good health care.
That's
right.
And we have an opportunity to do that in the state of Texas. And I just wanted to mention that because I hear so much about that from the people I'm blessed to represent, that we've got to do more in this area of health care. And so it's a top of mind issue.
Your chest pain, it may mean nothing, but it may take everything. Know the symptoms of a heart attack. If you have any of them, get to the nearest emergency room. We're waiting for you. It's your health, so everything is up to you. Everything. This message brought to you by Woodland Heights Medical Center, home of a nationally accredited chest pain center. Log on to learn more.
Are you interested in buying or selling real estate? I'm Becky Cota, broker and co-owner with my husband Kevin here at Century 21 Cota Realty. We have 21 agents that are highly trained and committed to delivering an extraordinary buying or selling experience. Contact us today to see how we can help you.
Absolutely. And these are issues that genuinely affect our day-to-day, as citizens of East Texas. And one of the things that, and I could be projecting this entirely, it may have just been my experience, but throughout this whole pandemic, this COVID-19 situation, I think we've really seen the importance of local representation and our local elected officials. There's something of a stigma in politics that people vote for, the president, or, they vote for whatever ticket they decide on, but without putting a lot of effort into who these officials are. And I think we saw through that there's a lot of our day-to-day that are genuinely impacted by our state and our local officials. And we saw changes that happened during COVID-19, when things could open up, when you had to wear a mask, where you had to wear a mask. But these were all happening from a state and local level. So tell me a little bit about how that change is impacted. There's this mantra that goes, if there's something that you don't like, to write your congressman or write your representative or write your senator. Can you walk us through how that process works? So I've actually had the benefit of being in this situation. So in my previous career, we had some legislation that impacted us gravely. And so we reached out to Trent and said, because we had a division here in East Texas, and we talked to him about the situations and met, and Trent picked up the phone and called me and said, hey, tell me about this. How is this affecting you? How is this affecting business? But I think people kind of have it in their head that you send an email or you write a letter and it gets kind of like filed away in a box, or you get an automatic reply and nothing actually happens. But can you kind of shine some light on that, how that process works?
Sure. So that is a easy question, kind of hard, as far as because I've got two responses, and so let me take it in kind of two approaches here. One is, my offices, both here in the district and in Austin, we get calls every day from people, frankly, that are just reaching out to look for some help with government, because it really speaks to the point of your question. A lot of times people don't really understand kind of the different levels of government, and so we take a very proactive role in, so I'm going to speak for my office and what we do. So if we get a call from someone, let's say it's about Social Security, or I'm going to give you another big one we get a call on is a veteran affair issue, a VA issue, VA hospital, whatever, VA clinic here around the loop. Those are clearly federal issues. Social Security, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Right. And so what we do is we don't just say, hey, you need to call, Congressman Gohmert, Senators Cruz and Cornyn. A lot of times what we'll do is we will actually make the handoff. So we will take their name and number, and then we will actually reach out proactively on behalf of the constituent and say to Congressman Gohmert's office, hey, we've been contacted by your constituent, our constituent, so-and-so. They have a problem with Social Security. Would you mind giving them a call and helping them? So there's a lot of collaboration that happens on a daily level at our office with both the federal side, and then conversely, we get a lot of calls from people that call us because they're having a problem getting their county road fixed, or they have a question about the local school bond that's coming up.
Right.
I had a lady call me. I won't tell you from where, but call me probably about 6 weeks ago now. She had a possum in her trash can, and wanted to know if we could send somebody over to get the possum out. And so you just never know. That's what I love about this job. You never know. Every day is a journey, and you never know what you're going to get when you pick up the phone. But what we try to do is really to clear up any confusion as far as who they really need to be talking to, which is really what your question was about. And so, but that collaboration happens at all levels. Gomer's office, or Coroner or Cruz, they'll refer people to us if it's a state issue. So many times we get people say, hey, I talked to the mayor's office, or I talked to Judge Lindberry's office. They recommended I call you because, I live off Farm to Market 1818 and we've got a, problem over here, for example. So, I'm pleased to report in our area of East Texas, there is a lot of collaboration at all levels of government to ensure that people really can have the issue that they have answered. It's not always the response they like, but at least to get a response. And so that's a big part of what we try to offer our folks. You mentioned the people that send an email, and of course. We live in a digital age where a lot of people prefer to communicate, via email form. I rarely get any faxes, hardly see many handwritten letters anymore. But we get a ton of emails, and we get a pretty fair number of folks that still pick up the phone and call us. Sure. And I can only tell you what our office does. But when we get an email, what happens is we log the receipt of that email. And I'm really glad you asked this, because I don't want people to think that their representatives don't see their correspondence.
Yeah, that's why I asked. I think a lot of people miss that.
So I hope this really gives them hope and appreciation for what government officials try to do. And so once every week, unless we just get a tremendous amount, my staff sends me copies of every email that I have received in my office, whether it was to my personal account or to our generic House District 57 account. And so I get to read every email that comes in, and then almost without exception, I don't want to say that we're perfect, but our goal is within 10 days is to send an email response to that constituent.
That's nice.
So that everybody gets a response. Some questions are easy. It may take one or two sentences. Some questions sound easy, but they're very technical or detailed. And so sometimes we just ask, say, hey, would you mind calling my staff person to have them kind of walk you through that issue if it's just too long to put on a piece of paper. So, but no, people, and I know I've heard from a lot of folks over the years that didn't get a response from other members of whatever level of government, and I can't change that. All I can say is, I would hope that every elected official would aspire at all levels of government to, when a constituent that you are elected to represent reaches out, you need to respond in some shape, form, or fashion. And so we try to do that.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Like I said, in my experience, having gone through that, and I wanted you to kind of explain it, because there are people who don't understand that. I mean, we did. We had a great response, and we sat down and met with your staff and got a phone call from you, and it was when it was time to kind of walk through what those issues were. And I just wanted to kind of touch on that and cover that.
That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked it.
And I think the moral of the story is, if you're here in this district listening and you want to get a quick response, it's to write a physical letter, apparently, because those are not in the big group of everything that happens. So
yes, I will put a plug in, as having had a mom who was an English teacher, and I am a stickler about good grammar and well written letters. But
that's awesome.
But I love, on the rare occasion that I see a handwritten letter or a thank you note or whatever. It's a dying art, I guess.
Yeah.
It is.
But I've said this not necessarily in a governmental sense, but I've said this to high school seniors. That whether it's interviewing for an internship or a job or whatever, to the extent there's written correspondence, handwrite a note.
Sure.
I promise you, it will stand out and people will remember it.
That's right. You start back in January. And we're blessed that we've got a great legislative consultant, Sherry Huddleston, that we work with. And I know Sherry's visited with you on a lot of different things. And she kind of says the buzz in Austin is that she thinks the state will open back up soon. And do you think that that's going to happen? And do you think once January comes that you'll be back in session in the Capitol, or do you think you'll have to go somewhere else? Or
Yes. So so I do think that, and let me say this. I know there's a lot of people that have been disappointed with Governor Abbott and some of the executive orders and decisions he's made, and I've tried to remind people that he's kind of been in a no-win situation.
Absolutely.
Right.
It just seems like about half the people want him to do this and half the people don't. And so
you can't make anybody happy.
Yeah, and so I'm just, the point I would make is he's doing the best he can
Sure.
with the information he has available to it. But in response to but let me say it, I definitely have not agreed with all of his decisions.
Agreed.
But I do think I'll go out on a limb, and I do think in the very near future that the governor is going to come out with another round of loosening of the current restrictions that are that have been put in place at the state level. Mm-hmm. Now, back to your question, some local usually it's the mayor of the city or the county judge in the county. Sometimes there are local restrictions that are more restrictive than even the state. So he can't fix everything necessarily, depending on what the locals are doing.
Sure.
But I do think that he's probably going to come out with some loosening, and I can tell you I can give you 2 or 3 examples of people that I've heard from a lot that are crying out for some relief, whether it's nursing home visits, visits to residents out here at our State Supporting Living Center. I've heard from a ton of bar owners how this has impacted their business, and I'll stop there. But there's others I could mention. So I know that he has been hearing the same criticism of his orders that I have been, and so my guess is he's probably going to be coming out with something before too long, and rightfully so, as he said. The numbers, of course, tomorrow may be a different number, but the numbers have been trending in the right direction.
Right.
They have been coming down. Yeah. So I do think there will be some loosening in the near future. As far as your question about the next session, I'm going to give you my opinion, and I'm one of 181 legislators. But the way I feel today is that we should reopen the Capitol. To me, that's the people's house, that's the people's Senate, that's the people's building. Mm-hmm. And we are smart enough, and there's enough measures and technology in place where we can put some screening in place at the doors of the Capitol take temperature checks, to offer masks to people that don't have them, whatever the case may be, to where we can, I think, responsibly allow people to come into their building and do what they want to do, whether it's take a tour or come see their legislator or whatever. Now, having said that, normally, and this may be of interest to your listeners, the way the process works really inside the legislature is you have the speaker that kind of governs the House, but he doesn't govern how those other 149 members run their offices.
Gotcha.
And for example, I'll just pick holidays. We get to decide our own holidays. Mm-hmm. There are some people that have more holidays than us, and others.
Or how fast you respond to an email, or
how fast you So
Right.
you really, so there's a lot of autonomy that we have when it comes to that. And so my point being is I know that I have some colleagues who I've talked to them, and they feel strongly that they're not going to allow people into their office. They're going to have a no visitor policy. If you're not a staff member, you're not going to be allowed in. Mm-hmm. I don't feel that way, but yet the point is I think that each member, senator or House member, needs to make that decision on what fits best with their office and what they're most comfortable doing. Mm-hmm. I would feel comfortable having an open door policy with certain measures in place to allow people to come in because I think that's what people expect, and not to put undue pressure on some of my friends that may be on the other side of this issue, but I just think it looks bad, and it seems to me, in my mind, it just seems to be a little bit of a double standard when we have our school doors open. Yeah. when we have our businesses, that have reopened in most cases.
Right.
And I look around and y'all do, and you see the number of people that are sending their kids to in-person school or going into businesses, and yet turn around and say that you can't come into your state capital. To me, that just doesn't sit well. And so I'm hopeful that we will have the Capitol open and that members will be allowed to decide on how.
Well, we hope that we can come.
Well, I'm looking forward to the annual visit.
We always come. The Chamber always puts together a great Lufkin Angelina County Day at the Capitol. It's always in February. We invite anyone to come and to go with us. We line up great speakers, and I have to just brag on your team because the guys put together such always great speakers for us, and so we truly appreciate their help every year. They kind of guide us on who they think might be interesting to hear from year to year. Yes. But that's one thing that we love to do is we bring our Leadership Lufkin class every year, and then we also invite any of the Chamber investors to come, and anyone from the community can come be a part of this. So we appreciate you always allowing us to come and bombard your office.
Oh, we love it. I tell the Chamber this every session, but I mean it. And it's not just the Chamber, but the highlight of the session for me is when I see people from back home in my district come over and take advantage of the process.
Sure.
And but there's probably nobody more organized than you guys are, because y'all do bring those 25 members of Leadership Lufkin, and then you have all the investors that come in for the reception that night. And it's just so awesome to see a room full of people from East Texas that are over there talking to their legislators and talking to other legislators, the other visitors that we invite to come to these events. These are agency officials that run these agencies, and a lot of times people get kind of tunnel focused on the legislature. Well, just as a reminder, a lot of our government agencies make decisions that impact their lives just as much as what the legislature does. Right. And so we always try to make sure that we have agency executives and heads coming over from, TCEQ, TxDOT, TDA, all the state agencies that touch our daily lives.
That's right.
So that folks from back home, Tara, to your point, can get to know them, and vice versa. And then they can visit about issues and help educate, kind of bringing that East Texas mentality to Austin, and basically pressing the point, in my terms, that, a one-size-shape-all policy when you live in Austin probably doesn't fit necessarily, especially in East Texas. In a lot of circumstances. And you guys are great about coming over, bringing crowds, and helping.
We're excited. We're a little disappointed that plans for next year have really changed. We're combining back with Nacogdoches. And so it's going to be Lufkin, Angelina County, Nacogdoches. We've got to figure out a name to call it, because that one's a little long.
It's a mouthful.
But every other year, we will be partnered with Nacogdoches when they have their leadership program. So we're excited about bringing a bigger group of people and constituents to Austin, and to be able to really join forces, because we do work well together back at home, and
that's right.
We're excited to be able to bridge that to Austin. But Trent, we just can't thank you enough for your time and for your passion and for all that you do for East Texas. We love you, and we love your family, and we look forward to many, many more years with you helping lead East Texas in the right direction.
Well, thank you, Tara. Thank you, Blake.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate being on this podcast with you today. And I just want to say it again to all the viewers and listeners out there that it's an honor to serve as your state representative. And anytime there's an issue that comes up that you need help with, that's what I'm here for.
Thank you.
And write a letter.
Thank you.
And write a letter. There you go.
No, thank you so much for coming on. We truly appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you tuning in with us every week. So we drop these podcasts every Monday, where we sit down with local business leaders, community leaders, and truly interesting people in the community. So if you're listening to this podcast, please do us a huge favor and rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening to it. That helps us out a ton. And also subscribe so that you get these episodes automatically right there on your phone or your device every single week. And also, if you'd prefer to watch this podcast in video form, we do have it available on the Chamber Facebook and the Chamber YouTube channel. So as always, thank you so much for listening, and have a great week.